and it's such a pleasure to be amongst you for this very important conference on solar power, and I will turn mostly for renewable and our quest for fighting the global warming. As you are all aware, last year, the year 2023, was one of the year when for about 200 days, the average global temperature rise from pre-industrial era has been more than 1.5 degree. And why this 1.5 degree? You may recall that COP21 at Paris, though they explicitly did not set a goal for restricting the temperature rise to 1.5 degree, but it was put that it will be our best endeavor to try and restrict that global temperature rise to 1.5 degree. Now, last year we already crossed it for about 200 days, and there were 2 days in November when the temperature rise crossed 2 degree. All this is just to put the whole things in perspective. Why renewable energy and why energy transition? Unless we act fast and unless we act decisively, the things might get to a situation where it will not be reversible. Some of the irreversible damages that may be caused. And let us be sure, it's not the planet or ecosystem which is at risk. It is we who are at risk, the human beings. Planet and the ecosystem will rejuvenate if we are not there. So we are at risk. Never make the mistake of sort of blaming or saying that the planet at risk. Nothing like that. So it's for us that we have to act. Globe, generally the COP has set a target of 2050 for net zero. But what it has not said is what kind of carbon emission are going to be added between now and 2050. What is important is not achieving net zero. Of course, that is important. But what is important is in our journey to net zero, how much carbon are we going to add further and whether that will be enough to restrict the temperature rise by 2 degree. 1.5 degree, please take it, it is gone. Now that is where the renewable energy and particularly solar, that becomes important. I will not dwell on how we have set a target of 500 gigawatt by 2030 because that's something now very close to us. What is important is how are we going to decide a path which will meet our requirement of 2047, that is about 100 years of independence, and further to 2070 when our country's net zero is promised to be achieved. So those are the policies, those are the factors and the issues which will have to be addressed to get into that path. Solar, among the renewable, is one of the most important element of the whole electricity mix. Compared to wind, it is much more stable, it is much more predictable. And that is why the most of the addition in renewable energy has been in terms of the solar and mostly in solar photovoltaic. But there are other forms of solar energy, for example, CSP, which we have not experimented on a large scale in India so far. Probably SECI would be leading the way by going for about a 500 megawatt of RTC power somewhere in the next year, on this year only. Then, apart from the solar and CSP, what are the other issues which are important for achieving the path of green transition? The renewable energy, by its very nature, is very land intensive. As of now, per unit of electricity generation through solar, that requires almost 50 times of the land compared to what is required in the thermal power plants. Now that sort of puts a restriction on it. Fortunately, there are zones in India which are quite solar rich, and these are not habited. Almost a very large portion of Rajasthan, the greater run of Kutch, the Leh and Ladakh area, where the solar insolation is also very high, in all these areas. And these places are very sparsely populated. Greater run of Kutch, I can say there is absolutely no population over there. So we are fortunate to have some of these zones in our country, and which must be exploited fully, because land is huge, as you would have seen when you are putting up the plants, are one of the most complex issues in India. The land laws differ, the records are not up to date. And so these are, in a way, sort of, they put some sort of obstacle in the rapid progress which we want to achieve. We must focus on RE rich areas, the solar rich areas, which I already mentioned, the three, and we must identify more and more of such areas. Then, whatever legal issues are associated with these RE rich areas, as you would have noticed, the issue of GIB, the Great Indian Bustard. Then probably in Greater Run, there is some environmental issue pertaining to a desert sanctuary over there. Ladakh also has some of these issues, environmental issues. These must be overcome. Unless we overcome these, the availability of land which is required by us is going to remain an issue. So that is where probably the floating solar will enter. But floating solar adds to the cost of solar energy. But nevertheless, as we regularly progress and the availability of land becomes an issue, the floating solar will find more and more of its place in the whole gamut of energy transition. But what we need to do to restrict or reduce the land requirement, that is where the innovations, the R&D comes into picture. When we increase the efficiency of the panels, the land requirements automatically goes down. So that is the focus area which the industry, academia, and our institutions must join hand to put our efforts into. There has been great revolution in solar. I remember in 2004-5, we were paying a tariff of about 17 to 18 rupees for per unit of electricity. From those days, after about 20 years, the prices have come down to 2.5 rupees per unit. That's a great progress. But have we put any thought what is our contribution in this reduction of the energy prices? Have we contributed to it, or some other country has contributed and we have just followed it? And then decide whether we are just going to remain the follower or we are going to be the leader. So far, unfortunately, from country's point of view and fortunately from the energy transition point of view, China has led the way. They have been the major contributor in scaling up and consequently reducing the price of solar power. Take it from me, we have not contributed anything to it except for the reverse auction which we introduced. But technological innovation, which are the foundation stone of any value addition, unfortunately have not come from us. And that is where I think industry and all other stakeholders need to put their mind to. Unless we do it, we will remain dependent on it, and it will be a very critical dependence which may be fatal sometime. The government has put in all the policies and regulations which are needed for rapid deployment of solar. You would have already noticed that this year, Honorable Prime Minister, he announced the rapid scale up of rooftop solar. About 30 gigawatt of solar energy is likely to be added through rooftop solar in coming 1 to 1.5 years. Solar energy, fortunately, has the advantage of being localized. It can be generated where it is needed. Of course, the time difference when needed at night, it would not be there. That is where the storage solutions would come. And fortunately, the price of storage has also been coming down, and different kind of storage solutions are becoming available. Similar is the case with PM Kisan. These are all distributed solar examples. We produce energy, generate electricity where it is needed, and in the process reduce the cost of transmission. There have been, because of the distorted tariff regime, the rapid deployment for various regions has not been possible, but hopefully these issues are sorted out and every stakeholder will find a value in adopting these at a very large scale, which is envisaged. So these are some of the thoughts which probably would be deliberated during this conference, and some of the very solid recommendations and policies or regulations which are needed for this rapid deployment would emerge out of it. Thank you again for listening me patiently, and have a good day.